Welcome to the Manager Matt podcast show. The show is designed to give you solutions to your day-to-day management and leadership problems. It's hosted by Matthew Haddock, a frontline manager and leader with over 25 years of experience. If you're ready, then let's get on with the show.
Welcome to the Manager Matt podcast show. I do hope you're well and getting results with your team. My name is Matthew Haddock, and you've managed to stumble, or you've been directed to a management leadership podcast which examines how people think, how people work, how your mindset as a leader impacts your business and, of course, your results. And, of course, in any business, you want to make sure that your machinery and your productivity is finely tuned. This week's show, I want to talk about how humans interact into the machine. Now, we're not talking Terminator and all that and this kind of Borg, if you like your sci-fi, but I'm talking about how, as a manager and a leader, how do we treat people? Do we treat them like machines, or do we treat them as individuals? What do we do with our modern day workers? We're talking about everything here, not just your shop floor guys, or your packing hall, or your warehouse operators. We're talking about your managers and middle managers. How do you treat them? We have, in the businesses I've worked at, we've called them machine minders, chief operators, cooks, whatever you want to call them, assembly line workers, packing, filling, manual processes. All those are there. Those people are at the heart of a lot of operations. Whatever you want to do with robots and computers, there is a lot of still having to do it. Who do you think keeps delivering the Amazon parcels? There is some of these strange robots about, but a lot of it is still done by people. Now, companies will always say that people are at the core of what we do. And I do believe that. I honestly believe that if you're a good leader and a good manager, you do have people at your core. I'm a very caring manager when it comes to that. I think it's important that we develop people. But I'm also very aware that the systems we employ in businesses are there to make sure they are as productive as they can be. And that means you get to this human versus machine. Where is the line between them? In operations, it's easy to blur that line. Machines, they can be predictable, they can be measured, they can be consistent. So what do? Well, we think, the human is part of that process, so we'll do the same. But of course, humans aren't like that. They are variable. They have variations. They can adapt to things. There's a positive there. They're influenced by things like fatigue, motivated by factors that are external to your workplace and the environment they're in. They're also outside the work. They've got all the other pressures, family life, all the things that goes on, hobbies are all there. Your normal packing automatic machine doesn't go off for the weekend and go to the coast on its holidays or on a mini break. Don't go to the pub on a Friday night, does it? It's there, but our humans do. But of course they are linked. But this creates a tension, doesn't it? Because as a leader who's measuring performance, who has this data-driven set of how a machine should perform, we've got an issue here. Because we're trying to optimise our systems, aren't we? The more we try to make the humans behave like machines, the more we have problems. Why do we do that? Well, of course, every machine has a standard output or a standard quality settings. It has a cycle rate. And on paper, it makes perfect sense, doesn't it? But of course, what consistency in the machine delivers, it can be undone very quick by inconsistencies in the people operating their machines. Humans don't work to a certain beat all the time. You do get some people who are like a metronome, but that's not constant. They get ill, they get poorly. When the last time a robot in a packing hall had a day off sick, they do break down. Sorry, engineers listening, I know things break down, but that's good PPM, isn't it? Good planned maintenance, stops all that. But humans do break down. Humans take breaks. The exact science of it isn't there, is it? Humans don't have that exact science. So what do we do? Well, should we theoretically treat the human like the machine is a great question. And I don't want to think that you're managing machines. I think if you're a leader and you listen to this podcast, you're trying to manage people. But in a highly structured environment, workers are sometimes viewed as interchangeable. They can be easily replaced. They're almost part of the machinery itself. I've heard finance people do this a lot. They'll go, your volume's down, Therefore, your overhead should be down, your overhead should be down, your volume's down, your overhead should be down. And of course, in theory, that makes sense, doesn't it? But what do you do with those people? We call them direct costs. And they are linked to directly making or producing or packing. But they're not something you could turn off like a tap. In most industries and in most modern workplaces, you can't just send them home if it's quiet one day, like you can a machine. You can't turn them off. In a way, they are a fixed cost. They're going to be there. You can try to use more labour across more machines. You can use them at a higher rate of picking if it's a warehouse operation. But they are still going to be a cost. So when the volume drops, unless you can get to a point where you can get rid of a shift, which is more about redundancy situation. But if it's a couple of quiet days, you cannot get rid of them. Another quiet month, you're not going to get rid of them. You can use agencies. And you can use agency workers to do seasonal work as you do. But that doesn't mean it. Your human cost is still going to be there. Now, people on the other side are the weakest link when it comes to a chain. So what goes wrong? Well, the system works perfectly fine. It's being consistent, but the people are not there. They are gone for a break. So it stops. Something stops running. The machines, they don't adapt. They're just waiting for an input. But the humans are not there. But we measure them that way, don't we? We get systems that measure overall equipment effectiveness. And we say that's how effective the machine's going to run. It's going to run at 60 cycles a minute and it's going to produce 70 or 60 widgets, whatever the terminology for your business is. That's not going to work in real life, is it? You are going to get to a point where the human is going to have an interaction. So what do you do about it? How do you make sure that that's here? What the workers, if they are the weaker link, what do you do? Or are they just the key to your success? How do you frame this? It depends on how you look at performance, doesn't it? If you're only measuring speed and output and error rates, well, yes, the humans look like the problem, don't they? Things are running slow because the human's not doing it. They've made mistakes because the human's not done it. They've had variety in it. That's their problem. But if you look at it another way and you look a bit deeper, who can spot the issues before the machine fails? The human. You've trained right, of course. Who can adapt when something unexpected happens, when you need to change a product or a customer wants something last minute in the middle of the night? The machine can't do that on its own, can it? The human has to do that. And of course, the manager has to do that. And who keeps production moving when, things go wrong? Who can switch? The computer can't, the robot, the machine can't. It needs the human. The reality is that humans are not our weakest link. They're the system that shock absorbers. They shock absorb all the issues that's out there. They absorb variation. They solve the problems. And they keep the operation driven. And you as leaders keep your operation driven. We can go back to the good old days, if you all remember it, call it good old days, time and motion. It's been around for forever, hasn't it? If you think back to the time and motion studies, people with a clipboard and the old stopwatch, the traditional time and motion studies tried to break work down into precise steps, exact timings, optimizing the sequences. And there is still some good measure in that. But the goal, of course, is to maximize efficiencies. That's what it was all about. But these studies often miss something that's really critical. The relationship between the task, the work isn't just a sequence, it's a system. So that's what they miss. When they used to measure, of course, when you were being measured, people have been watched. Now, what have we done to help do that? We started putting more monitoring systems on. And even what I hear, knowledge workers are becoming monitored. There's a camera, a bit like the one I'm talking to now, that looks at the screen and looks at the person's face. And if they're not doing something productive, they've even docked wages. So you can see how the time and motion, which has always been traditionally about machinery and people on machines and, the operator level, are now moving to the next level. And of course, we know that AI is a different beast altogether and not something for this podcast, but how AI is starting to change the workplace, how AI is now making even our knowledge workers less important in the day-to-day. But leadership and management, as long as the people are in there, are still going to be key skills. So, where's the stopwatch gone? Who does the monitoring now? Well, we don't see the supervisor with stopwatches anymore. Maybe a little, but not as much. We don't make no mistakes. We're still out there measuring. We're not stopping it altogether. It hasn't disappeared, but it's evolved. It's got real-time dashboards. It's got BI reports, performance tracking software, sensors to automatically capture that data. That's all there. And these systems record those things like outputs per hour, downtime, idle time, all that stuff we just mentioned about error rates. And you even get into the ones where you've got computers that are measuring the output using cameras. Very easy software now that starts to look at visual checks. And that's a good thing, because it means your businesses that you're running are going to make less mistakes. Therefore, your customers getting what they want. Therefore, you're going to get paid better. The mistakes that people make rework, make customers frustrated. So it's good to have those. But of course, as I've just mentioned, when you're crossing that line and you're starting to becoming a risk of being over-monitored, that's where things go wrong. When you're monitoring people, it becomes too excessive. A few things will start to happen. People will optimise the metrics. People are smarter than the machines. We might not think that way, but they'll find a way around it. If you remember the ones, I don't know if you've seen it, where people saying that they were measured by how much the time they were on the computers when they worked from home. Well, they just had someone who just flicked the mouse. I remember a Simpsons episode where he just had one of those ducking kind of bird, and it was just pressing the key. And that were enough for the computer to think the person were there. Now, of course, software is getting more advanced. But that's what people start to do. They find shortcuts. They find ways to, reduce the monitoring. But they also, on the human side, they get stressed and fatigued by the fact they're being overwatched. If everything you did was being watched, what would happen? Trust goes out the window, doesn't it? And it's really important that workers don't stop. Because you're monitoring and tracking and controlling, that doesn't mean that you're going to remove the space for that person to have some sort of judgment. No ownership is no good for you. No initiative is no good for you. So you can monitor it, and what you've seen in the studies is productivity starts to go down. The more you monitor people, the more it goes down. A better way to think of this performance is to, should we measure performance as a question? Well, of course you should. But let's think of the individuals in this. Do we want them to be part of the system? There is a case where you automate and you remove roles that have become or are becoming redundant because you've got automation there. But of course, if you take them out too much, you need to ask yourself, what's the consequences if that work doesn't get done? Now, what's the variation that's going to happen if I don't have somebody there? What mistakes and problems are not going to get solved if I don't have a person there? Because a magic software that some salesman's going to sell you at a conference will look great on the shop, on the floor, when they're selling it on the old conference hall. But when you get home and you get some reality in there, is it actually going to be the point where you're going to drop this adaptability? You can have no resilience in your system. You have no problem-solving abilities left because you're trying to outsource it all the time. So it's always important that what looks good on the dashboard doesn't replicate onto the shop floor. So how does it all come together? What is it? The humans, they're not machines. No, of course not. But in many situations, you can design the fact that you can remove some of those human interactions. And of course, systems don't necessarily make mistakes. The problem with it is you have a gap that you create if you get rid of too much human intervention, and then you get no imagination, you get no problem solving, you get no adaptability. The future of good leadership, especially in operations, is to close that gap. Use your data, yes, but also listen to the workers, understand their real concerns, and design systems that work with people, not against people. Because in the end, machines will drive efficiencies, but people make the systems work. Well, I hope you've enjoyed that episode around how humans and machines are interacting in the modern workplace. If you do get a chance, please share this episode with people who might enjoy it. And of course, give us any feedback wherever you find us. You can find me on the socials, you can find me on LinkedIn. You obviously can put comments wherever you get your podcast, or if you're watching on YouTube. Well, that's it for Manager Matt this week. Thank you so much for listening, and goodbye.
Thank you so much for listening to this Manager Matt podcast. We hope you found it interesting, helpful and actionable. One last thing, please leave a quick review on iTunes or with your podcast provider, as it helps to spread the word of Manager Matt. If you haven't already done so, please subscribe to the podcast, and if you did like anything in particular, send an email to managermattpodcast@gmail.com or visit managermatt.co.uk for more content. Feedback is a gift, so let's keep giving. See you next week.